Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you. We're being hosted by friends of mine here at 25th Street Recording. We're in ISO room 2, surrounded by all these incredible cool diffusers.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good in here.
It does sound good in here. Drums sound great in here, actually. So let's start with the state of the state. And what I mean by that is kind of a level set of, this is an opportunity for you to, kind of say, who you are, what you consider yourself, artist, producer, engineer, where you work out of, and what are you currently like working on in general? What's the life look like today?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Mark Pistel. I tread that fine line between artist and engineer producer. I make some of my own music, and I've made music in bands and with other partners over the years, but I also record and produce and mix folks. I have a project studio that I run called Room 5, and it's project studio on steroids, I'd say. I've got some nice gear, some nice mics and pre's, and Pro Tools rig and good monitoring, live room and a booth. I keep it pretty working class.
And that's based out of Secret Studios, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, for the audience, another guest that's been on who's based out of there is Rob Preston.
Oh, I know Rob very well.
Yeah, Rob's been around for a long time.
He has.
Now, is your room kind of built out in a similar way?
It is.
Okay.
It is. My room, well, someone else had it for a couple of years before I moved in, but I've been there 20 years now, so I've kind of made it my own. But yeah, it's a built-out space with double walls, double doors, so I don't hear, too much rumble from bands rehearsing in the warehouse.
Yeah.
It's pretty quiet during the day, and I'm able to get work done, so it's all right.
Well, let's go back a little further in time. Let's actually go back to where you grew up.
I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, northern Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I started playing in cover bands by the time I was about 13 or 14, and I was playing in bars by the time I was 17, 18, and kind of doing that full time before I moved out to California. I moved out to Northern California in 1980. I knew there was life after cover bands. I wanted to play in an original band and make music and all that kind of stuff. I was young and ambitious, and a friend of mine had moved out to Northern California. It was actually started in Santa Rosa, and I joined this band out there called the Defectors. It was my kind of first band in California in 1980. We made a single and used to play all the clubs of the early 80s, the Mabuhay and the Palms. I can't remember all the venues, but we used to play around, the early 80s venues in the city and then in Northern California as well.
What was your memory of San Francisco from a music scene perspective back then?
Oh man, it was really vibrant. I think the San Francisco scene was really pretty vibrant up until the end of the 90s. I mean, there was different things happened over the years. My heyday was probably, I moved to LA for a couple of years between 84 and 86. And then I wound up coming back. I joined this band called Until December. And so I ended up moving back to San Francisco, I guess it was the end of 86, early 87. Mm-hmm. And then that was kind of my heyday here from, I'd say, 87 to 2000s, I guess. A big turning point for me is, post Until December, I started this band with Adam Sherburne called Consolidated. We were influenced by the kind of early industrial scene that was happening back then, mm-hmm. Along with hip hop. And so we kind of combined those two. I guess it was 87. I got my first sampler, which was an Emax 1. And that completely changed my life, and that started me on the path to music production. In addition to being just the bass player.
Prior to moving to Northern California, did you have any experience recording?
No, not recording at all. Although being the bass player, that always meant I was the guy setting up the PA. So
yeah, it's always the bass players and the drummers.
yeah, right? Yeah, we had a working band, and we bought a PA, and I was always the guy setting it up. We had a little, if my memory serves, it was a bi-amp mixing desk, and some kind of Crown, or maybe it was a phase linear amplifier, with a couple of Altec A7s. The whole time I was in bands and everything, I found out that I could actually make money going to do sound at these clubs where we were playing,
So your entrance into the audio professional side of it was through live sound?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I worked for this audio company for a little while in LA doing installations, and I learned a little bit there, but it was mainly just kind of out of necessity because we weren't making any money playing in a band, but I could go earn $100 or whatever going to do sound. The very first place I ever did sound was at the Chi-Chi Club in North Beach, if you remember that place. It was a couple of doors down from the Stone, across the street from the Mavuhe.
I remember the Stone for sure.
Yeah. I wound up getting the house gig at the Kennel Club.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is now the Independent. So I worked there. I worked at the Kennel Club, and I worked at the Night Break, who had the same owners. And so that's kind of what I did for money. I had a sampler and a 4-track and a drum machine, and so we started cutting demos, all the early Consolidated demos in our rehearsal space. We'd record with a 4-track and a drum machine and a sampler, and Adam had this guitar synth, and we were going for a pretty radical sound, and I mean...
And were you able to synchronize, all of those 3 items? 4-track with the sampler and the drum machine?
Yeah, well, we played them live mostly. Okay. We'd have the, song pattern. It was a TR-707, so we'd have the, pattern with an SPX 90 on the gated reverb setting. Big drums off the SPX 90.
Yeah.
We had Walkman cassettes, and we'd go around, literally ride our bikes around to construction sites around town and record sounds, and then we go back and put those in the sampler, and that became kind of the basis of our Consolidated sound.
The sampler helped bring a certain level of, at that time, 16-bit fidelity or maybe even 12-bit fidelity.
It was 12-bit, yeah.
Yeah, and give you the opportunity to kind of branch out in ways that were more economical than buying a 2-inch 24-track. And
yeah, no, absolutely. It was a game changer. When, I knew I wanted a sampler, but when the Emulator 2 was around, I think it was like $10,000, and for me, it might, at that time in my life, it might as well have been $100,000,
Mm-hmm.
But the Emax was $2,500, and so I was like, ooh,
that's achievable.
It's like, I can get that.
Yeah.
I can get that together, and so, yeah, so I did. I got that Emax, and then eventually a sequencer. Ken Kesey, who had been the producer for Until December, loaned us his early Roland sequencer and hooked that up with the Emax, and we were off to the races, with our sound. And eventually we graduated to like an Alesis MMT8, and that was a thing.
So when you started to get more involved in the production side of it, did you ever have a shift in your brain about just getting excited about production in general?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And did it ever, I'm sure in the beginning days you loved playing, and I'm sure you still love playing, but there's such a thrill in helping others put stuff together like that.
Yeah.
Were you experiencing that then?
I was, yeah. No, absolutely, because I was the de facto production guy in the band, although our very first recording, very first album for Consolidated, we wound up doing it with this engineer named Michael Ahern at Russian Hill Studio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Michael was, we were getting a little interest at the time with our 4-track demos. Michael was kind enough to give us some spec time at Russian Hill. Remember the days of spec time?
Spec time, yeah.
Yeah. Our first album was done at Russian Hill on their big SSL. I was not confident enough for studio engineering yet, but we recorded everything on 2-inch tape and with Michael Engineering. Like I mentioned, I was doing sound at the Kennel Club. Just down the street from the Kennel Club was a small studio called Razor's Edge.
Yes.
And it was owned by Jonathan Burnside.
Yeah.
And although we had done our main recording over at Russian Hill, we cut a couple of demos, and I think Adam produced a bit. I can't remember exactly how we met Jonathan, but anyway, we started doing a couple of demos at Jonathan's place at Razor's Edge, and he and I wound up becoming friends, and really interested in developing my skills as a studio engineer. And Jonathan went, "Hey, well, there's nobody in here between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. Here's the keys." And that was the start of it. Shout out to Jonathan. Love you.
Wow.
And so I went in there, with my buddies. We'd stay up late and work all night making really bad recordings. and then eventually they started sounding better. Yeah.
And you and, God, I'm spacing on Billy's last name.
Billy Anderson.
Billy Anderson.
Well, Billy Anderson was assistant engineer on some of our early recordings that we did there. Yeah,
that must have been like a magical time for you.
It really was.
So much learning about audio and production. Do you remember like just some of the key takeaways, whether they be artist related or business related?
One thing is the technology was changing so fast. By this time at Razor's Edge, we'd got a second Emax, and so we had these more complex sequences going on, and then we had our friend Jimmy Dixon, who he was a DJ at KUSF, and then eventually worked for Sire Records under Howie Klein, and then eventually worked for Apple. But Jimmy was younger, and he's like, "Hey, there's these computers, that have like sequencer software on them. You should get a computer." And I was like, "Okay, Jimmy." Well, and I did, and so I got a Mac Plus, loaded up with floppies, and I learned to use this program called Vision. At Razor's Edge, we had our 2 Emaxes, and then eventually Jonathan picked up an Emulator 3, which sounded way better, and then we had our Vision software, and then all of it we would sync together to a Tascam 16-track 1-inch machine. Sync the computer to that. It was yeah.
At that time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. It was heavy. And for our second Consolidated record, we did the whole thing at Razor's Edge. I was engineering. During that same time, I started working with Disposable Heroes.
Such a great record.
I knew Adam and Michael Franny were good friends, and he had a band called the Beatniks. And we and the Beatniks shared a rehearsal space down on Hudson Street, just off 3rd in San Francisco, next to the sewage plant. Anyway, the Beatniks broke up, and Michael asked me if I would, help him work on some new material. So, of course, I said yes. So we started the Disposable Heroes with the 2 Emaxes in my bedroom, and eventually brought that over to Razor's Edge. So I was working on a Consolidated album, Friendly Fascism, at the same time that I was working on the Disposable Heroes record. And then for both of those, we brought our good friend Jack Dangers from Meat Beat Manifesto to help us on the mix side, and Jack was there. Well, we really admired Jack and loved the way his record sounded. He came in, and he and I together mixed both Friendly Fascism and the Disposable Heroes record.
Amazing. Kind of reflecting back on that time in the Bay Area, we were talking a little bit earlier about the Kennel Club and the Night Break, and that period of time, for those that don't know, was magical in San Francisco.
It truly was.
Up on Upper Haight Street, we had Night Break and the I-Beam, with the Paradise Lounge.
Yep.
There was just, it was, pre-internet, pre-cell phone, pre-Uber.
Yeah.
I just remember taking taxi cabs like, okay, tonight we're going to, my band's going to play at the I-Beam, and then we're going to cab it over to the Paradise to go see some other band.
Oh, yeah. There was so much stuff going on. I mean, so many bands.
And, you guys doing that stuff at Razor's Edge, Eric Valentine's over working on his band T-Pain, and there was just all kinds of shit going on.
There really was. Yeah, I know. It was a magical time here.
What was the first record for you that you worked on, that you engineered, produced, or mixed, and got excited about?
The first one that I really engineered was Friendly Fascism. And yeah, I was super excited about that. And Disposable Heroes too. It was like kind of a dual whammy. They both came out around the same time. Our record came out on Network Records, Canadian label, and then the Disposable Heroes came out on Island Records, major label. Ooh, yeah, I was excited.
Did that change, how you felt about like where you were going in life as a audio professional, or as a musician, or as a producer?
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought, hey, maybe I can really do this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is not a phase. No, it was never a phase. Look, from the time I was like 12 and heard Led Zeppelin, I knew I wanted to be in bands and play music.
You just eat, breathe, and shit, all of it, all the time.
Yeah, and and going back to my childhood or young adulthood, Duluth, Minnesota, small town, northern Minnesota on Lake Superior. Not a recording studio in sight in those days. So as I went to vocational school and I took broadcasting. I went into because it was as close as I could get to a recording studio. And so we did, like radio production and that kind of thing. I did like 2 years of training there. So
and that predated your move to Northern California.
It did. So yes, I guess I was in a studio. Backtracking, it's a long twisted tale. What can I say?
I gotta say, and I say it not to blow smoke up your ass, but that Disposable Heroes record, to this day, I have a CD copy of it. Simone White, of course, who played drums with the band, is an old friend who I worked with at the Fillmore, and I loved how that record sounded.
Oh, thanks.
So what were we hearing in essence there? Were we hearing 1-inch 16 track mixed with some samplers and sequencers?
So they had a Trident TSM at Razor's Edge at the time, and I believe it was still a Tascam 16 track 1-inch. And so all the music was made with the samplers. Like we would play, guitars and basses and keyboards and things, but we'd always record like snippets into the sampler and build up the tracks like that, A
lot of samples on that record.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You probably couldn't get away with making that record today, could you?
No, probably not. I mean, we did, because they came out on a major label, we did clear most everything, but, there was some stuff that, you could never get cleared.
Yeah.
And nowadays you couldn't get away with it, but we did. So yeah, the vocals would have been on tape. Pretty much everything else in the samplers, like even if, like with Simone's drums, we would have him playing along to the track live, and then we'd record him, and then we'd make a little mix of them, and then we'd use that as we'd put it in the sampler and use it as a loop.
At that period of time, San Francisco, while expensive, was not what it is today. So survival-wise, how are you doing back then?
Well, the city wasn't as cheap as the Midwest, but it was not expensive. I mean, I don't know. I lived in a 4-bedroom flat with a bunch of roommates, and we probably all paid $200 each for $200 or $300 a month for rent. And yeah, you could survive in this city back then. Doing sound a couple of nights a week at a club, you could survive,
Yeah, I remember I moved a number of times because, you'd be in, a studio apartment and then a big flat with a bunch of roommates and just mixing it up and moving around, and roommates. That was just commonplace back then.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was the way. But I don't know. I made a lot of friends that way as well. Like people there was the roommate referral down on Haight Street, and you would just sign up or you'd look for somebody. Pre-internet.
Technology-wise, on the recording side of things, obviously we know where things went, but how long did you stay with a setup that mixed tape, samplers, etc., and sequencers?
It would have been up to the late 90s. I mean, as the analog tape was phased out, then, along came ADATs, 24-channel ADAT rig, and then I still used Vision with the samplers, being controlled by MIDI. Mm-hmm. And then, and then you would lock the MIDI program, the sequencer program to the ADATs, and I did that for a while. And then I made a record for this one band called Super Fuzz. One of the guys in Super Fuzz was this guy called Scott Walden. Scott's brother Ken, you may know Ken Walden. Another engineer. I know it all comes full circle. Anyway, so Ken used to work for DigiDesign at the time, Pro Tools, pre-Avid. And so those guys had a Pro Tools 3 rig. It was the first Pro Tools rig that I was aware of that had DSP. It had plugins.
That was my first rig.
Yeah. So, my first rig was the Pro Tools 1.2. I believe it was a Nubus system, and it had originally 4 channels, but then you could get the SCSI expander and add another card, so you get up to 8 channels, but no DSP, no effects or anything like that.
Okay.
And so then, I guess then we started doing the vocals like into the computer, although it was a little restrictive because you'd run out of memory really fast. Like I remember I had a 1.2 gigabyte hard drive that I paid $1,500 for. And so, this 1.2 gigabyte hard drive, you could get maybe a song, maybe 2 if you were lucky, if it was only vocals, right? And so literally then you'd have a data backup tape and...
DDS.
Yeah, and so you'd have to dump the hard drive and, onto the DAT backup, and then do your next song, and then dump that one. But if you want to make any mixes and changes, you'd have to load it up again off the...
so painful and slow.
It was crazy. It was crazy.
The kids these days don't know how easy they have it.
They don't. But anyway, so I think that was in like 98 or 99. I made the Super Fuzz record using the band's own Pro Tools 3 system. The interfaces were the old DigiDesign Blackface 888. Now this is before the 888-24. This is a 16-bit.
And that system could only do 44 and 48.
Yes.
Because that was my first rig, was a PT3 system with a single 888.
Right. The record eventually came out, and the album's called Push the Button, and it was released on Warner's in Japan. So
I mean, I think we naturally know it, but those that are younger that might be listening at that time, it wasn't virtual sense. It was rack-mounted pieces of hardware where that was triggered by MIDI from
exactly. And around about that time, I started. Like late 90s, I started collecting synthesizers as well, with inspiration from my good buddy Jack Dangers, who was kind of on it before me. He was, at that time, like all these great analog synths, nobody wanted them. So I started building up the synth collection. I think early on, I was so into my sampler world, I was really into that technology,
You were fast with it, I assume.
I was.
Because you started there, and it seems like all the little things that you have to know about a sampler back in those days, you would just probably learn it so well that you could make the most of it.
And so I would record phrases in and sample them and things. That was still kind of a thing because it's a workflow that I had just kind of gotten into.
Do you think that in any way, shape, or form, not for nostalgic reasons, but for workflow reasons, does that have any value that you feel in today's workflow?
Well, you should ask Jack Dangers. Because I'll tell you what, Jack has gone back to samplers.
Wow.
He has. Because he's always been a big breakbeat guy, and his whole sound is finding those elusive rare grooves and then chopping them up and and making sound collage out of them. And he's got a Logic set up at his house, but he's recently gone back. Last time I was up at his place, he's gone back to samplers. He's got a full rack. He's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 different Akai samplers he's got, and that's what he's using for his beats nowadays. And he says it's mainly about the sound. He says there's something about those converters that they have this, aggressive sound that you don't get off a DAW.
Well, yeah, because I think modern DAWs today mixed with modern converters are light years ahead of what we had back then. And
yeah.
So there's some compromises made in those early converters, and they had a character to them.
They did, absolutely. And the Emu sounded different than the Akais, It was definitely a thing.
Through those records that we talked about, you worked at Razor's Edge. Where did you make the transition over to Secret Studios to start building up what you have there?
Eventually, Consolidated wound up with a major record deal. We got signed to London Records, Polygram, and they gave us a rather sizable advance. I had it in my head at that time, the working class audio. It's like, well, I know that this stuff's not going to last forever. I want to buy enough gear and build a studio so that I never have to pay for studio time again. That was my thought at the time. And so I did with that money. I bought a bunch of preamps and microphones and a bunch of stuff. And I had a little studio in this house where I lived in Miraloma Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that for a while. Had to leave there for personal reasons. That's another story.
Another podcast.
Yeah, another podcast. But and then I had a little spot down on 9th and Mission for a while. Similar setup. And then eventually I met this guy, Happy Sanchez. You know Happy Sanchez, of course, everyone knows him. Everyone in San Francisco anyway. And Happy is the owner of Secret Studios. And at the time, he was also running this record label, a rock and Espanol record label called Aslan. In the late 90s, I was doing a bunch of production stuff for Aslan. And the guy that had my space that I have now before me had moved out, and Happy was like, let me make you a deal, and that was about 20 years ago, and so I had the same space now.
That's amazing. Secret Studios has been there for so long.
Yeah.
It used to be next door to McCune, right?
It was when I first moved in there. There was Secret Studios on one side and McCune Audio was on the other side, and eventually McCune moved out, and so Happy took over the whole warehouse and built out rooms over there, and that's where Rob Preston's room is on the newer side.
Now, obviously, that's a space that you rent.
Yes.
And I haven't been over there in ages, but I'm assuming that it's still full of bands.
It is.
Which is good, because then, that business will continue and the space will exist, and all the good things that come with having a rehearsal space filled with that.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of leaving for a change of scenery?
Well, I have, because rent keeps going up, and
right,
and but it's I'm pretty dug in there, and if I could find another place or another situation that was beneficial and affordable, I would consider it. From what I've seen around, even though rent keeps going up, I still have a pretty good deal there compared to what's available throughout the Bay Area. And I love the Bay Area. I really don't want to live anywhere else. It's really expensive here, but there's a lot of other pluses that keep me here. So,
yeah, my wife and I have contemplated moves to other places, and then when I start to seriously consider it, I start to get a little depressed, and I'm like, I don't know if I can leave.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience is, but I can't say that the music industry or the San Francisco music scene is as magical as it once was.
It's definitely not. It started in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I think the final nails were in the coffin probably in the early 2010s. Tech came in and took over the city and
changed the dynamic.
It changed the dynamic, priced all the artists out. Gone were the days of 4 roommates in a $1,200 a month flat, and so I guess the artists that wound up staying here, a lot of them moved to Oakland,
Yeah. Everybody made the eastward migration.
Yep. And myself included. I live in El Cerrito now just because I got priced out of the city with my apartment,
Yeah.
And it's not what it was.
So knowing that it's changed the way it has, and the music scene has changed, the dynamic of the city has changed, how have you adapted? Like how do you survive? I assume you continue to make, super cool records.
I do. Honestly, I got to say a lot of it is luck and a lot of it is tenacity. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with some really cool music projects. I mentioned Until December, and then I had my band Consolidated, and then after Consolidated, I became a member of the band Meat Beat Manifesto for about 10 years, and then round about 2008, 2009, I ended up joining this other band from New York called Hercules and Love Affair, who were a new disco style band, and I ended up doing a lot of touring with them. I toured the world with them for about 7 years and co-produced their second album, this album called Blue Songs. I'd been on tour with Hercules for about 7 years, and then my time with them ended. I came back from tour. I guess this was 2015, like early 2015, and I was like, okay, great. I'm just going to plug back into the studio full time. All my clients were gone. I just couldn't get a gig, and so I had a drummer friend at my studio, and I was probably whining about my financial state, and he said, well, hey, you've got audio skills. Why don't you come work for Local 16, the stagehands union? And I was like, yeah, why don't I come work for Local 16?
Why not?
And so I did. And so I got back into the live audio scene again. I became a journeyman, and I did that for a living for about 6 or 7 years. Up until the pandemic. So then I was doing the union stuff. I was still, doing bands at my studio, but it wasn't enough to survive on. And then the union became my main source of income for a few years. Corporate audio, a little bit of rock and roll. I started working at the Fillmore again. I started doing the front of house at the Fillmore, or monitors or front of house, whatever it was. And so I'd work a few times a month at the Fillmore. I do, corporate stuff at various hotels around town and Moscone Center, things like that. And so, just out of necessity, I did that. I got to be honest, I don't love it, but right. but it was a paycheck, and
it's not digging ditches,
right? Exactly, and it's still audio related, and then around pandemic time, all that live work went away.
Yeah.
Right. Everything shut down, and then just as luck would have it, I got my hustle on, and I connected with this guy, Scott Crow, who was running this little record label out of Texas called Emergency Hearts. And then I ended up, like, he had a bunch of production work that he needed for the studio, or for his label, and so I started doing that. You know, one thing led to another, and then I found another long-term client, and then other people started coming in, and then so post-pandemic, I was able to switch back into my studio as my full-time source of income. I maintained my union work. I decided I didn't want to do the corporate stuff anymore because it was too soul-sucking. But I thought, hey, working at the Fillmore is still cool. Yeah. It's a good room, and so I kept my gig at the Fillmore, and I'd work there 5-6 times a month, and then fill in the rest with my studio. That's continued to grow. I've been very fortunate. I've had just it's so weird because like when it rains it pours. It's like when nothing's going on, then all of a sudden everything is going on at once. And I think it's just the nature of the business. I can say this year I've been like totally busy. I have a couple of long-term clients that are monthlies that come in, and then a few pickup things here and there, and and this is all indie stuff. There's no record labels anymore. It's just like this is just people that are making and paying to make their own music.
Yeah,
and those are the folks I'm working with. And
the beauty of that is you get paid as soon as you're done.
Exactly.
There's none of this 30, 60, 90-day billing.
Right, exactly. And the other nice thing about it is everyone that I work with is either friends or friends of friends or friends of friends of friends. It's all word of mouth referral. And so there's very few assholes that I have to deal with anymore.
Has your workflow changed in any way?
Yeah, it has. Like I mentioned, I did my first full Pro Tools record, in the late 90s, and then as time went on, I graduated. Eventually it was a Pro Tools 5 system with 88824s, and then eventually I had to invest in an HD system, and then I ran that HD system for a good 10 years, because that thing was expensive.
I know.
It was like that HD system. I think I dropped like 15 grand on that thing, at the time. These days I'm using an Apollo X16. Mm-hmm. I never need to record more than 16 channels at once. So, now I'm on Pro Tools and Apollo, and I've still got a ton of outboard gear and synths and all that. So now it's kind of like a synth lab if anybody's into it. I've got loads of synths on either side, and everything's all MIDI'd up or sync clock. You can send pulse clock to anything that's not MIDI. I send
anything pre-MIDI days.
Anything pre-MIDI, I use a Kenton that sends pulse clock, and you can sync up all the modular synths and make all kinds of bleeps and blips in time.
But to make the records that you did in the 90s, essentially you could do that all in Pro Tools at this point.
Absolutely, yeah.
And do you feel that efficiency takes anything away from that process?
Yes, I think it does. I think that limitations breed creativity, mm-hmm. And also when I first started using this thing, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just pushing buttons and trying to figure it out, and so I was probably doing stuff wrong, and that made it unique.
Yeah.
And now in this age of information, and if you ever need to know how to work something or hook something up, you just get onto the YouTube or the internet or whatever, and you can read all about it, and the experts will tell you what to do, and that's cool. I mean, I think ultimately maybe the fidelity of things have improved. I still try to keep it fun and spontaneous, you know, with the recording. But yeah, it is different. There was you didn't just put up a beat loop and it was automatically in time. You could spend the whole goddamn day trying to get 2 loops in time with each other.
Right. Well, there was a struggle there, and there was time, you know, put into reading manuals and calling people. Do you know somebody that knows how to do this?
Yeah.
Well, I don't necessarily crave to go back to that. I could see the value in it.
Yeah.
And remember that, oh, right, you know, it caused us all to communicate a little more. And
right.
I got a guy in, you know, who lives next door, who knows the SPX 90 really well.
Yeah.
He'll get you through the menus.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Can you ever see yourself doing what Jack is doing in Meat Beat Manifesto and just going, you know what, let's make a record on old samplers?
Well, it could be fun. I mean, you know, I still have a couple of the old samplers, and I have broken them out a couple of times. We did a little Consolidated reunion show a few years back, and so I had to unarchive all this stuff, you know, put it in Ableton Live, you know. And that's also the thing with the, you know, these, a lot of the synths I have are vintage, and so yeah, you know, nowadays you can kind of get into that, or if I want something to sound, I haven't taken it as far as Jack has, but if I still have the Akai, if I want to put a beat loop in the Akai, I can do that and, you know, chop it up.
Does it come back to you when you do that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. It's a little daunting, to be honest. Yeah, I have to, like, you know, it's a little head scratcher with some of the stuff, and like, how did I do that? You know. And
have you managed to hold on to a lot? You mentioned the synths, I know.
Yeah.
But did you ever go through like I got a clean house kind of?
Well, I definitely got rid of the ADATs.
Oh.
You know. Okay,
that's easy to do.
You know. I mean, for a time, I actually had a 24-track machine at my studio. We had a 2-inch MCI machine in there for a while, and I have a patch bay, and so I had that up in the patch bay. And so for a couple of projects, you know, I mean, there was all this kind of in the 2010s or so, you know, there was, you know, people were still not ready to give up analog, or, you got to have your drums recorded in analog. And I did a few projects with that, but then the thing sat there for 5 years, never turned it on, and eventually I sold it.
When it comes to whether it's working with other producers or engineers or working with artists, let's take two sides of it. Let's take the pro and the con. What drives you nuts about working with people? Like, what is a pet peeve of yours?
Okay, there's nothing more annoying than a know-it-all, right? Somebody comes in and thinks they're going to tell you how to do your thing, right? And you know, that said, I don't mind if somebody has a suggestion or you know, if they know something I don't, hey, I'm all ears, you know. But that kind of a thing can get under my skin a little bit.
When somebody comes in and has no clue what your history is?
Yeah, and thinking that they're going to tell me how to run things. Yeah, I'm old, you know. Look, I'm in my 60s. I got a right to be crotchety.
But on the flip side of that, you know, what do you love about working with people, whether artists or other producers and engineers? What brings you joy?
Well, I still get excited when somebody's got a good song or somebody delivers like a stellar performance, you know, that makes your hair stand up, you know. I still get excited for that. I'm working on a record right now with this guy, Michael Shaw, and he's a really great songwriter and a singer, and we've been on this now for a couple of months. It's a slow burn thing. We're going to be on it for a while. But, you know, he writes these beautiful songs with these beautiful chord progressions and melodies, and I'm just, I love it. You know, when I hear something that takes me back or sounds classic or I still get a thrill. Absolutely.
That's great that you still have the excitement, because you don't come off jaded. You come off experienced, but you don't come off jaded. And
I try not to be, really.
Yeah, it's still great to see that you have such excitement and thrill for it all.
Well, I'm still that little kid, you know.
Yeah.
Inside, I'm still.
I know. Well, it kind of keeps you young, you know. It really does. Well, do you maintain a website?
I do.
Okay.
It's just markpistel.com.
Okay.
MarkPistel.com.
I'll put a link in the show notes for those that want to reach out or those that want to, just do a little, poking around on your website. And well, I'm super happy that we finally got to meet. Like I say, I've known about you for a long time and have admired the records that you made, and people have said great things about you. So it's nice to finally put a face to the name.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you too. I've heard of you around town as well, and it's just surprising we haven't.
I know. Well, we stick it out, right?
Yeah.
We stick it out and stay doing what we're doing, and eventually, it happens. So, well, thanks, Mark. Sure. It's great to have you.
Right on, Matt. My pleasure.
Take care.